The break should have frozen by now. In this place, it always did. As the season advanced, the sea tightened its grip, locking itself into a continuous sheet of ice that erased open water and forced everything to choose: stay or go, dive or wait, move inland or commit to the edge while it still existed. Today, the edge remained open. The penguin stood at the lip of the ice, body upright, flippers held slightly away from its sides for balance. Its feathers were dense and clean, black and white broken only by faint grey staining along the belly from repeated contact with ice and water. The wind cut across the surface in short, sharp bursts, but the cold beneath its feet felt incomplete. The ice did not thicken. Below, dark water rolled gently, rising and falling against the frozen margin. The break line shifted by centimetres with each swell, breathing in and out instead of sealing shut. Thin plates of new ice formed briefly along the edge, only to fracture and drift away moments later. The penguin watched this without moving. Waiting was part of the rhythm here. Penguins timed their lives to ice, when it formed, when it broke, when it held long enough to trust. This edge was normally temporary. It closed, and when it did, everything changed at once. But now it hesitated. The penguin leaned forward slightly, peering down into the water. It could see movement below, faint shadows, drifting shapes, the suggestion of life carried just beneath the surface. Open water meant food. Fish moved here. Krill gathered along the edge. Normally, this was opportunity, but opportunity depended on predictability. The penguin did not dive. Diving into open water when ice was still unstable carried risk. The break could widen suddenly, forcing a long swim to return. Or it could close abruptly, trapping the penguin beneath thin ice not yet strong enough to support a body above it. The penguin waited instead. Its posture remained relaxed but alert, head turning slowly as it tracked the shifting margin. Each small change in the ice was registered, a crack forming, a plate flexing, a sound travelling faintly through the frozen surface. The sounds were wrong. Ice that was ready to seal made noise, sharp cracks, long fractures snapping into place, the groan of sheets pressing together. This ice whispered instead, soft and uncertain, never committing to a single shape. The penguin shuffled 1 foot forward, testing the surface closer to the edge. The ice flexed slightly under its weight, then held. Enough to stand, not enough to trust. The sea breathed again. A swell lifted water against the ice, darkening the edge, washing away a thin rim of new freeze. The penguin stepped back instinctively, avoiding the sudden wetting that would steal heat unnecessarily. Cold water was tolerated when chosen, not when accidental. Around the penguin, others waited too, spaced along the break, each bird holding its own narrow section of edge. No one dove, no one retreated. The group existed in suspension, bodies aligned toward a decision the sea refused to make. The sky above was pale and hard, clouds thin and stretched, allowing light but little warmth. Wind skimmed the surface, carrying salt and cold, but not enough to drive freezing deeper. The penguin tucked its head briefly, conserving warmth, then lifted it again. Time passed without resolution. The break did not close, the water did not retreat. The ice did not strengthen. The penguin remained at the edge, balanced between land and sea, ready for a change that should have come and had not. In this place, delay was not neutral. It disrupted feeding, movement, and safety all at once. The penguin did not know why the sea stayed open. It only knew that the moment it had been waiting for, the clean, decisive shift from water to ice, was missing. And as it stood there, motionless against a boundary that refused to harden, the penguin faced a problem that could not be solved by instinct alone: how to act when the edge did not become what it was supposed to be, and when waiting, usually the safest choice, began to stretch into something else entirely. The penguin shifted its weight slightly, easing pressure from 1 foot to the other. This was not impatience, it was regulation, a way to keep blood moving, to prevent stiffness while remaining still. Normally, waiting at the ice edge followed a clear internal clock. The break would either seal, forcing retreat inland, or remain reliably open long enough to justify repeated dives. This break did neither. The penguin watched a thin skin of ice form again along the waterline. It spread outward like glass, fragile and translucent, stitching the sea to the frozen surface for a few quiet seconds. The penguin leaned forward, eyes fixed on it. Then the skin fractured. A soft sound followed, not the sharp crack of commitment, but a dull tearing as the ice pulled apart and slid under itself. Dark water reappeared, unchanged, patient. The penguin straightened again. Each false start mattered. Ice that formed and failed repeatedly created traps. A penguin diving at the wrong moment could surface beneath a lid too thin to break cleanly, too unstable to trust, forcing frantic searching for an exit while oxygen drained away. The penguin had learned this early in life. It did not dive now. Instead, it studied the pattern. The swell rose and fell in a steady rhythm, subtle but persistent. With each rise, water reached farther under the ice edge, stealing heat, undoing what freezing tried to build. With each fall, the water withdrew, leaving exposed margins that froze briefly, then failed again. The sea was actively preventing closure. The penguin angled its body slightly away from the wind, feathers tightening as a gust passed. Wind usually helped here, stripping heat from the surface and driving freeze. Today, it skimmed without effect, sliding over water that retained warmth it should have lost. The penguin glanced sideways at another bird nearby. They did not communicate directly. No calls passed between them. Penguins at the edge did not need vocal signals. Posture and persistence said enough. The other birds stood the same way, facing the same uncertainty, neither diving nor leaving. This told the penguin something important. No one had solved the problem yet. Hunger began to register more clearly now, not as urgency, but as awareness. The penguin's last feeding dive had been hours ago. Normally, this edge would have allowed several short dives by now, each one efficient, predictable. Instead, the body waited. Waiting burned less energy than swimming blindly, but it also postponed intake. Balance between those costs was usually straightforward. Today, it was not. The penguin took a cautious step closer to the edge again. It lowered its head and peered into the water, tracking movement beneath the surface. Fish shadows passed intermittently, slow and unhurried. The food was there. That was not in doubt. The problem was return. The penguin imagined the sequence without imagining it. Dive, chase, turn upward, emerge. Every part of that sequence depended on the edge behaving consistently. Right now, consistency did not exist. A low grinding sound passed through the ice. The penguin froze instantly, posture tightening. The sound was distant, drawn out, travelling along the frozen surface rather than through it. It was the sound of plates shifting far away, not pressing together here. Movement elsewhere, not here. The penguin relaxed slightly, but did not move. This was the deeper disruption. The ice system was no longer acting as a single structure. It behaved in fragments, each responding to different forces: swell, temperature, wind, without coordination. For a penguin, this meant no clear rule to follow. The penguin stepped back again, placing itself fully on thicker ice, away from the unstable margin. It did not retreat inland, but it created distance, space to reassess without being forced into immediate action by a sudden change. This too was new. Normally, the edge itself was the safest place to wait. Today, safety fluctuated by the minute. The penguin tucked its flippers closer to its body and lowered its head briefly, conserving heat, conserving energy, conserving attention. When it lifted its head again, nothing had changed. The sea stayed open, the ice stayed thin. The moment stayed unresolved. Waiting had lost its timing. And as the penguin stood there, not hungry enough to risk a dive, not secure enough to trust the ice, not threatened enough to flee, it entered a state that was unfamiliar and dangerous in quieter ways. A prolonged pause in a world built on decisive transitions. If the break did not close soon, waiting would stop being a strategy, it would become a cost. The light shifted without changing the situation. Clouds thinned slightly, brightening the ice surface until it reflected a hard, flat glare. The penguin blinked once and adjusted its stance, angling its body to reduce exposure. Normally, this change in light would have coincided with change in ice, tightening, cracking, sealing. Instead, the sea below continued its quiet motion, indifferent. Time stretched. The penguin had been still for so long that stillness itself began to cost something. Muscles cooled. Circulation slowed in extremities. The body compensated automatically. Small controlled movements of toes inside the feet, minute shifts of weight that kept tissue alive without advertising motion. Hunger sharpened, not as desperation, but as pressure. The penguin's body measured time not in hours, but in missed dives. Each delay altered the internal balance between intake and expenditure. Normally, that balance was corrected quickly. Today, it accumulated. The penguin stepped forward again, closer than before. The edge flexed faintly under its weight. The bird froze, instinctively lowering its center of gravity, flippers held slightly out for balance. The ice did not break, but it responded, a soft bending that confirmed what the penguin already knew. This ice was not becoming stronger. It was becoming familiar. That was dangerous. Familiarity invited mistakes. It encouraged the body to relax assumptions that should remain sharp. The penguin recognized this not as a thought, but as a tension it refused to release. Below, a school of fish moved closer to the surface, drawn by light and the partial shelter of ice overhead. Their movement cast slow, shifting shadows that brushed the underside of the break. The penguin watched them closely, head tilting slightly to follow their path. Opportunity was pressing upward. The penguin calculated without calculation. One dive, brief and efficient, might be enough. A quick descent, a short chase, a return before conditions changed again. Penguins were capable of navigating unstable ice. They had done so before, but not like this. The instability here was not episodic. It was continuous. The edge did not oscillate between states. It hovered between them, never committing long enough to be predictable. The penguin remained still. Another bird farther along the break moved. It took 2 careful steps forward, leaned, then slipped cleanly into the water. There was no splash, just a smooth disappearance. The ice flexed, but held. The watching penguins did not follow. They waited. Seconds passed, then longer. The water beneath the break darkened again as the bird moved deeper. The surface remained unchanged. No cracks raced outward. No sudden closure followed. This was information. The penguin absorbed it cautiously. Then the water broke again, farther along, not where the bird had entered, but offset by several meters. The diver surfaced abruptly, flippers slapping once as it hauled itself onto the ice, body wet and steaming faintly in the cold air. It did not linger. The bird moved quickly away from the edge, shaking water free, posture tense. It had returned, but not where it had left. That mattered. The penguin understood the implication immediately. Entry and exit were no longer paired. The edge behaved like a shifting door, opening and closing unevenly along its length. This raised the cost sharply. A penguin diving now could return under ice that had shifted, forcing it to surface at a different location, possibly farther from the group, possibly under thinner ice that would not support its weight. The penguin stepped back again. The decision was not final, but it was reinforced. The risk had not vanished. It had clarified itself. Around the break, the group adjusted subtly. Some birds increased their distance from the edge, others remained where they were but turned slightly, tracking not the water below, but the ice itself, watching for signs of coordination that never came. The sea stayed open. The penguin's body remained poised in a narrow band between hunger and caution, between the urge to act and the discipline to wait. This balance was becoming harder to maintain. Waiting was no longer passive. It required effort. And as the penguin stood at the break, Watching fish pass beneath ice that would not close, watching light change without resolution, it encountered a truth that migration and breeding seasons rarely demanded, that sometimes the environment did not force a decision by changing sharply, but by refusing to change at all, stretching indecision into a test of endurance where the danger was not immediate failure, but the slow accumulation of cost while the sea stayed open and the moment to act never fully arrived. The penguin stepped away from the break. Not far, not in retreat. Just enough to place its weight fully on ice that no longer flexed beneath it. The movement was deliberate, measured, a choice made not from fear, but from accumulated evidence. The edge had stopped being a place to wait. It had become a variable. From this slight distance, the penguin could still see the water, still track movement beneath the surface, still return quickly if the situation resolved. But it was no longer committed to the margin itself, no longer balanced on a line that refused to settle into safety or danger. The sea continued to move. Open water rose and fell, dark and patient, ignoring the rules that usually governed this season. Thin ice formed and failed again, briefly sketching shapes that never lasted long enough to trust. The system was no longer binary. It did not switch from open to closed. It hovered. The penguin stood with flippers tucked closer now, posture conserving warmth. Blood flow adjusted, favouring core over extremities. This was the posture of endurance rather than readiness, not ideal, but sustainable for longer periods. Around it, other penguins made similar adjustments. Some moved farther back onto thicker ice, others lay down briefly, bellies against the surface to reduce heat loss, heads turned toward the break so they could still watch. The group spread out slightly, no longer aligned in a single waiting line, but arranged in a loose arc shaped by caution. No one dove. This too was information. In a colony built on collective timing, hesitation shared across many bodies carried meaning. If the edge were truly usable, someone would have committed fully by now. The absence of that commitment was itself a signal. The penguin lowered its head briefly and closed its eyes for a moment, not sleeping, but resting the constant vigilance that waiting had demanded. When it lifted its head again, the water was unchanged. The sea stayed open. This did not mean opportunity was gone forever. It meant it had shifted out of phase with expectation. Feeding would still happen, but not here, not now, not in the way it usually did. The penguin turned slightly inland. Not to leave the coast, but to reposition for a longer wait, one that might stretch into hours or days rather than minutes. Inland ice was thicker, colder, more reliable. From there, the penguin could conserve energy, regroup with others, and return if the break finally closed or stabilized. This was adaptation. Not dramatic, not decisive, but necessary. As the penguin began to waddle slowly away from the edge, it did not look back repeatedly. There was no benefit in tracking every small change now. The edge would either resolve itself or continue to hover in uncertainty. Either way, standing on it no longer improved the odds. Behind the penguin, the sea continued its quiet refusal to freeze. The break breathed in and out, unchanged, unconcerned with the animals that depended on its decision. Ahead, the ice rose gently, solid and pale, offering nothing but stability. The penguin joined the others there, bodies settling into a quieter rhythm, conserving heat, conserving strength, conserving patience for a future moment that had not yet aligned with the present. The break did not close, but the penguin no longer waited for it to. In choosing distance over indecision, it accepted a harder truth than hunger or cold, that survival here did not belong to those who waited longest at the edge, but to those who recognized when the edge itself had stopped being a place where waiting made sense.